Richard Branson. Well, is there anything he doesn't do? A high school dropout at the age of 16, he's started companies, he's seen the world, and he has more adventures than anyone could dream of in a lifetime. He's a creative personality and a brilliant businessman, as well as being an energetic, charitable man who has built a brand recognizable around the world. And by the way, he's also worth nearly $5 billion. So how exactly did Branson get to where he is today? Let's start at the beginning, the 1950s in Surrey, England. Branson was born the eldest son of Edward and Eve Branson, a lawyer and a flight attendant. Though she was a flight attendant, Eve Branson didn't sit idly by on her days off. She built wooden trash cans and tissue boxes, selling them for extra money for the family. Watching his mother's success built Branson's admiration for entrepreneurs and gave him an option for when school just wasn't working out. She was always supportive of him and was even known to tell people he would one day be Prime Minister of England. His mother was also an influence on Branson's active mind and lifestyle that have become so much a part of his international brand today. She didn't let her children watch TV, instead pushing her son and two daughters outside to entertain themselves and make themselves useful. Though clearly brilliant, Branson was not a successful student. He had dyslexia, and growing up school, it was difficult for him. But dyslexia did not stop him, and now he credits it as a key part of his formula for success. If you have a learning disability, you become a very good delegator, because you know what your weaknesses are and you know what your strengths are, and you make sure that you find great people to step in and deal with your weaknesses. He moved through several schools as a child, eventually giving up on institutionalized learning at the age of 16. But he did not give up on achieving. When he dropped out of school, he already knew that being an entrepreneur, that was the right life for him. He started out with an idea and with an ultimate goal far beyond just earning money. From my very first day as an entrepreneur, I felt the only mission worth pursuing in business is to make people's lives better. His first venture as a teenage businessman was publishing a magazine called Students. At only 16 years old, with no input or work from anyone but students, Branson was able to secure $8,000 in advertising for the magazine's first issue. This was 1966, and $8,000 was a lot more money then. So much, in fact, that Branson didn't even have to sell the first issue. Instead, he gave away 50,000 copies, building the brand's name and a potentially loyal customer base for future issues. It was the first demonstration of a brilliant business mind with an utterly impressive talent for marketing. Student, it continued in its original form for 3 years, but in 1969, Branson, he felt the urge to make it even bigger and to take it in a new direction. Advertisements for records were a large part of the magazine's revenue, so Branson took records and the magazine and put them together. Essentially, he spotted a gap in the market for mail-order record sales. His mail-order business, well, it was christened with a name that we all know today, and that would be Virgin. But it wasn't actually Richard Branson who came up with that name. It was one of his first employees. Though they were successful, the name was perfect for the company, as all of the young people involved in it were new to business. Well, that name, it obviously stuck, and now it's come to represent much more than just mail-order music. Though the mail-order business, it was popular, it wasn't making enough money to stay afloat, and Branson, well, he needed cash. He decided that the best way to do that was avoid giving the government the entire share of the taxes that he actually owed. He came up with a scheme through which he avoided reporting all of the records that were sold in the UK, falsifying the numbers of those that were exported. It sounded good, and it did bring in cash, but, well, it was discovered. He actually ended up in jail and having to pay over $60,000 in fines. This obstacle and a short time in jail didn't slow him or his business ambitions down, though. Even with the tax fraud scandal, it was only less than 2 years after starting the mail-order record business that Branson was able to take yet another leap. In 1971, he opened an actual bricks-and-mortar store in order to sell records. Then it was only a year before he bought himself a home and was able to build a recording studio inside it. Now that he had a studio, the next logical step, it was to start a record label. So he looked around and ended up signing an artist he thought would be okay, but not likely to have overwhelming success, as no one else would take him on. And so what was the name of this newly created record label? Well, of course, it was Virgin Records. The label had success almost immediately, with its first artist, Mike Oldfield, staying on the charts with the album Tubular Bells for nearly 5 years. To put this in perspective, the record was on the charts as long as it took from Branson to go from selling records by mail to having his own record label. The success of Oldfield and Branson under the upstart Virgin label, it didn't go unnoticed, far from it. Huge names like the Sex Pistols, the Rolling Stones, Culture Club, Janet Jackson and Genesis, they were all later signed on to the label. Throughout the 1970s, while Branson was in his 20s, he focused on his ever-growing music business. But by 1984, he was again itching to try something new. So he took what seems like a pretty large jump across industries. He invested in a new airline business. Before launching the full-fledged airline service, Branson had realized the potential for doing so when his own flight to the British Virgin Islands was cancelled. Being wealthy, he didn't have to wait around at an airport for the next flight at the whim of the airlines. He could charter his own plane. So he did it, but he didn't keep the large plane to himself. Instead, he charged the others, who were supposed to be on his original flight to the British Virgin Islands, a small fee, and they all flew together on the chartered plane down to the island. His creative mind and business intuition, they saw an opportunity here, and Branson, well, he was ready to seize it. Soon after his initial experimental charter flight to the British Virgin Islands, he called up Boeing and asked what they had for sale. Well, they said that they had a Boeing 747 available, and Branson bought it, and this was the start of his fleet of airplanes. As he had with the mail-order record business, Branson saw a need and a way that he could run a business better than others who were currently doing so. So, in true Richard Branson style, he did just that. "We just made it that much more special than the other airlines we were competing with," he says of what he achieved with Virgin Atlantic Airways. Long before it was the norm, Virgin was offering such luxuries as individual TV screens to help people pass the time on flights. Now, initially, Virgin, it operated only out of London's Gatwick Airport, but by 1991, it had grown to the point where it was given permission to fly out of Heathrow. British Airways, well, they were not so pleased by this new threat to their previously unchallenged supremacy, and they certainly did not sit idly by while Virgin kept gobbling up the market share. In 1993, Virgin accused British Airways of a so-called series of dirty tricks that ranged from computer hacking to libel. Following the accusations, British Airways, they settled and forked over nearly $4 million in legal fees and compensation. Now you might be wondering, well, what did Branson do with the money that he received in this settlement? Well, he didn't just stick it all in his own bank account. Instead, he decided to share it with Virgin's employees. Now, though the settlement, it was a win for the company, it didn't mean Virgin and Branson were completely successful and had nothing to worry about. On the contrary, in fact, Branson was unfortunately forced to sell his music business in order to keep his empire going. EMI, they bought Virgin Records in 1992, and although it was a good business decision, it was a tough personal choice for Branson. The music business, it was Branson's baby. It was his first venture, and it was the reason everything else he had built was possible. Over the years, he's been very open about just how difficult that sale was for him. I mean, you build something from scratch. We had just signed Janet Jackson, we had signed the Rolling Stones when we sold it. And I remember running down Ladbroke Grove, tears streaming down my face, with a check for $1 billion. Since the sale, Virgin Airlines has continued to grow. Branson added a cell phone sector to his business, and then a space travel venture called Virgin Galactic. 500 people have bought tickets of an as-yet unscheduled flight into space with Virgin Galactic. Overall, Richard Branson owns 200 companies linked to the Virgin brand, but, well, business, it's not his only interest, and nor is it his only talent. Branson, he could just sit comfortably in his island resort home, but, well, he prefers to explore all corners of the world and to do so in ways far more interesting and far more perilous than in the comfort of a Virgin Atlantic plane. He's flashier than your average billionaire, with no qualms about risking his life in the pursuit of adventure. Adventure that also serves double duty as a completely out-of-the-box marketing strategy. He makes no distinction between his professional and personal endeavors, simply aiming to enjoy life and making a difference where he can. I don't think of work as work and play as play. It's all living. Well, in 1985, Richard Branson made international news when he tried to set a world record for the fastest crossing of the Atlantic. He failed in totally spectacular fashion as his boat capsized and he had to be rescued by a British military helicopter. He said of this, "Do not be embarrassed by your failures, learn from them and start again." And well, again, in Branson's true form, he absolutely did. In 1986, he attempted the Atlantic crossing again, but this time he succeeded in spectacular fashion. He broke the world record for the crossing by over 2 hours. But breaking this record, well, it wasn't enough for Branson. He wanted more adventure, and he also wanted to keep his name, and Virgin's name, in the news. He'd done a water crossing, but now he wanted to move onto air. Airplanes, they were not exciting enough. So he opted to cross the Atlantic in a hot air balloon. And then, crossing the Atlantic it wasn't enough, so he decided to cross the Pacific in a hot air balloon. Now, it wasn't all purely for the pursuit of adventure that he took on these hot air balloon challenges. He actually truly enjoyed traveling by hot air balloon. He said, "My favorite mode of transport is hot air ballooning. It's so graceful to be blown by the wind, to go where the wind takes you." Now, the balloon Branson took on his first flight, it was a record breaker in and of itself. It was the size of a 21-story building, and it was built to fly at a speed of over 200 miles per hour. It was simply the largest and the fastest balloon ever constructed. Large and fast, though, didn't make that balloon immune from danger. The flight's path was from the state of Maine to Ireland, and when the balloon reached Ireland, it didn't detach as it was supposed to. Instead, Branson and his crew found themselves dipping into the freezing waters of the Atlantic. His crew jumped out of the balloon, but Branson was forced to stay put after the balloon rapidly lifted to 12,000 feet with him still in it. Terrified, but able to remain calm, Branson navigated the balloon back down towards the water and jumped into the ocean when he saw he was just a few dozen feet above its surface. And now let's move on to the Pacific balloon trip, because this wasn't much calmer. They ran out of most of their fuel partway through, and they were dependent on the jet stream to simply push them forward. Branson said, "I was facing almost certain death. We could have just slumped on the floor and accepted our fate, or tried to fly the balloon into the core of the jet stream and find the strongest winds you can find, stay awake for 3 days, and do everything you can to avoid what, on paper, looked like a sad ending." Branson's crew, well, they chose to stay awake and do what they could. And, well, they overcame their challenge. They didn't break the records they hoped to, but they did live to tell the tale of their adventure, and that was all they could have asked for at that point. A man like Branson, who devotes much of his life to the pursuit of pleasure and growing a business, might seem to be pretty full up on time commitments. But for Branson, business and success is about much more than just amassing wealth. It's about helping people. "I never started out in business to make money. I wanted to create products that made a difference in people's lives. The same is true today. In my opinion, there's nothing quite like the gift of giving. When you see firsthand the impact it can have, it becomes the best feeling in the world." Branson has used not only his money, but his brand and his notoriety to influence world leaders. He and Peter Gabriel of the Virgin Records band Genesis talked to Nelson Mandela about their dream of having a group of world leaders formed to work on the pressing issues facing the people of the world. Well, what was the result of that? Well, that would be the group The Elders, a group of some of the world's most respected former leaders, including UN officials, President Jimmy Carter and Desmond Tutu. Branson, he does provide funding for the group and its initiatives, but it was really his initial idea and his willingness to care and have those initial conversations that really made this all possible. And then we come to environmental issues, which are one of Branson's personal passions. He's committed hundreds of millions of pounds to fighting global warming and even hosted a summit at his private island in 2009. So now you might have the question, why does Richard Branson care about preserving the earth and its beauty quite so much? Well, like his creative bent, Branson credits his childhood home and the amount of time he spent playing outside to this. "I was fortunate to have been brought up in the countryside in a little cottage. I suppose that the first 10 years of my life was spent in the countryside, biking, climbing trees, and in touch with nature. I suppose that's where my love of nature started." Overall, he's worked with dozens of charities in his life, dedicating his time and money to the causes that he cares most about. The United Nations has even recognized his efforts, giving him their Citizen of the World Award in 2007. Most recently, Branson has thrown his charitable energy towards helping the Caribbean islands rebuild in the wake of Hurricane Irma's destruction during the fall of 2017. With his home on Necker Island in the British Virgin Islands, he has a personal interest in doing so, but has gone well beyond just rebuilding his own luxurious home. He spent time helping mobilize rescue efforts and assisting with the distribution of water and supplies, as well as helping people find shelter. Clearly, Branson is not a man to stand idly by when there is a need or an opportunity. In promoting the Virgin brand and promoting the causes he cares about, Branson has become a highly recognizable personality and a frequent guest on news and other shows. But he doesn't always stick to the serious stuff. He's made cameos in the Bond film Casino Royale and cemented his place as a 90s icon when he starred on both Baywatch and Friends. He was also featured in the iconic Apple Think Different ad alongside such luminaries as John Lennon, Gandhi, Einstein, and Pablo Picasso. Richard Branson, he's not your typical uptight businessman. He's a creative luminary who has impacted all the corners of business and impacted many parts of the world. And that's what he aims to do each day. He wants to put the things he's passionate about to work for himself and for the world. A passionate belief in your business and personal objectives can make all the difference between success and failure. If you aren't proud of what you're doing, why should anybody else be? Amid everything, Branson has also found time to marry and have children. His first marriage was in the heyday of Virgin Records, when he wed Kristen Tomasi in 1972. That marriage lasted only 7 years, and the couple divorced in 1979. Branson had already met his second wife, Joan Templeman, by the time he and Tomasi divorced. And as Branson admitted much later to Piers Morgan, he had a daughter with Templeman in 1979. Sadly, that child lived for only 4 days. It wasn't until 10 years and 2 more children later that Branson and Templeman actually tied the knot. Richard Branson, he could have continued to struggle through high school doing things he hated and that he didn't care about. He could have fought his way to becoming a lawyer like his dad or settling into a middle-class office job in London or the surrounding area. He could have stuck it out, but he listened to his instincts and he went with his heart. A dropout, he could have fallen to the bottom and struggled through life feeling sorry for himself for having a learning disability. But his passion and his personality, along with his mother's constant encouragement, propelled him forward. Richard Branson drew on his creativity, took risks, and never shied from a challenge. Every time he failed, he brushed himself off and tried again. He gives back to a world that has given him much, and he continues to succeed as a businessman and as an admired personality. Richard Branson once said that if you want to stand out from the crowd, give people a reason not to forget you. Richard Branson, well, he clearly follows his own advice, and this has led him to a successful and passionate life. So I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up below, and do not forget to subscribe. We put out brand new biographies just like this of modern day people like Richard Branson or people from history, also some things on the darker side, serial killers. We cover the gamut of people we think would make a good biographics video. So do subscribe. Brand new videos twice a week. That's Mondays and Thursdays. Also some of our older videos over there on the right. More stuff that you can check out right now. And as always, thank you for watching.